Okay, here is a quick and unfortunately unscripted getting started video for Retro Animator. And so this is how Animator looks when you just double click on it to run it, and you're going to need to load a project. So I just created on my desktop, or I should say I copied over the actual player one, which is Alex character from Metro Siege. So we'll just load that up. As you can see, it loads super fast, even though it's got a ton of animations. And let's go to a more interesting sequence. So you could see there, here you have an animation with quite a lot of frames. You could scroll through the frames here. So quite a few frames. I'll turn off play. And you can see with the 1 and the 2 key above the letter keys, for example, above QWERTY on a English keyboard, we can pan through the frames, but the frames themselves here, for example, if you look, so this column is animations, and you could just click through here to get two different animations you've created. You click here to create a new animation. And then sprites, they're not necessarily sprites, but these are the body parts that you're using. And then these are frames you create, and animations are made by creating frames and then telling Retro Animator what frames to display in what sequence. And a benefit of this method for saving memory is that you can create one frame and it can exist in a lot of different animations. That's very useful sometimes. Well, obviously saving memory on retro systems is always very useful. But so that's the gist of it. But the really important thing to know is Retro Animator is a modular animation tool, meaning the whole point of it is that you can create robustly animated characters by creating as few body parts as possible and just moving those body parts around. So you see, if I click on the canvas here, once I have any given frame selected, you could select frames by clicking on the actual frame in an animation, or you can click on frames directly in the frame list to get to the frame and start animating it. So what you want to do, let's turn off play again. Spacebar toggles play on and off. And left mouse button in an empty part of the canvas will let you pan around if you need to. Right, the mouse wheel will let you zoom in and out. And then if you left click on an actual body part, you can then nudge it around with the W, S, A, and D keys, or you can click and drag it. Another important thing is that if you press the X key, it will horizontally flip it, but that's the only kind of manipulation of a body part image itself that Retro Animator allows, because it is based on ancient technology, and this is not for making animations that put use to really special features of specific systems, like the Neo Geo could scale individual sprites, or the Super Nintendo could rotate background graphics. But anyway, you get the point. This is just horizontal flipping is what is allowed. So now, how to actually start a project. You do not use Retro Animator itself to create the pixel art that you're going to animate. What you're going to want to do first is use your pixel art program of choice to design your characters and then break them up into body parts. And it is a skill you have to acquire to learn how to design body parts that can be reused for a lot of things and that overlap nicely and allow for some nudging. So the simplest example I can think of for that would be idle. So let me find the idle animation. When you create new animations, it automatically orders them alphabetically. So here is the idle animation, and let me play that for you. And you can see it's just a really simple idle pose for combat. You know, he's ready for fisticuffs. And so the thing is, though, that you could notice is that there's no new body parts at all in the entire animation. We're just shifting things around. So what I tend to do is, when I'm designing a character in the first place, I do it in the actual size the character's going to be, because there's no point designing a character you're going to turn into pixel art on paper or in high resolution, because it's very likely that there's a very common trap where you're going to over design your character, relying on all kinds of cool little fine details that you can never really get in the pixel art in the first place. Whereas if you design the character as pixel art from day one, you're going to make the strongest design that you know will hold up well as pixel art, where you're worried more about silhouette and strong color and value contrast. And that way you can always do a high res illustration or an illustration on paper after the fact, and then you can add those little subtle details that don't need to show up as pixel art because they're just additional little details, like detailing zippers and adding buttons and seams on clothing and stuff like that that wouldn't do well on pixel art. But anyway, that ends my lecture on how to design characters. But so I would design a single idle pose. I would design it in layers. So I would have a back arm, a torso, a head, front arm, so on and so forth. And then I would trim and save out each body part. So let me actually go to that folder for you. And here it is. So you could see the first thing you're going to want to do when you're ready to start animating, you need to set up a folder for the entire character. And you're just going to create a subfolder for your images. It doesn't matter what these images are named. What this folder is named. It also doesn't really matter what the images are named. But so here are all of the body part images used to create all of those animations for the playable character. Then you could see they're all trimmed very tightly to the actual pixels. You don't want a big giant canvas of empty pixels around each body part. You want to be as optimized as possible. So there are his body parts. Let's go back in here. So once you create a new project by clicking New, you have to point it toward a specific folder. I've already done that before, so, but you would just pick a folder, click Save, and then once you did that, this parts is going to populate. This is just all of your different body part images you can use to create frames with. And then you're going to just create a new frame, and you're going to just drag body parts. So let's click on this, and we'll make it a name that will hopefully go to the top. But you would want to name it something sensible. But as you could see, it just automatically went to that frame. There's no sprites in it yet, and there's no animation we're working on at the moment. So then all you would do is start picking and dragging pieces of your character. So the chest, for example. Also, it's a really good idea. This would be considered the hot spot in a video game, or the anchor point. So if you tell a game logic to put a character at X coordinate by Y coordinate, it would put this spot at that coordinate. So for a platformer game, for a beat 'em up game, what you want to do is have it so that the feet basically fall along this line, and then the character is centered vertically around this line here. So but anyway, you could see you would just grab the head, drop that on, and then you're going to end up with, let's see, we'll take this arm here, and then let's see if he was actually throwing a punch. You could see how quickly we could start to get something, but this arm should ideally be behind this chest in Z order. And what you could do is just go into sprites and just drag it to adjust the Z order. So that's an easy way to handle that problem. And then let's see, let's finish his legs and all of that stuff. So let's find his normal pelvis. I don't remember the naming convention. I haven't worked on this file in a million years. So here we go. And then, but you can see I don't want to waste too much time. I just want to explain the basics of how to use this tool. But that's how that works. You set up a frame, and then what you could do once you have that frame is you could right click and you could clone the frame, and we're going to call that a B, so it's alphabetically right beneath it. Or we could actually do this. This would be even safer, I think. Let's try that. There we go. And so these obviously are identical, but a lot of times, especially in the case of an idle animation, the frames are going to be extremely similar to each other. So now I can just, if you right click and drag, you can multi-select and use the WSAD key to shift things around. So let's say this is a punch and not an idle. So now we're going to nudge. So you could see the effect here. He leans forward more with his head and torso. The arm comes out more. And this arm, we'll say, goes back like that, right? So there you go. And then you could create an animation. We'll call this 000 jab. And then so once you have your animation created, you make sure that's selected. You could see here there's nothing down here, but I could drag this frame in and drag this frame in and any other frames you need. And then you could click play and it's going to keep looping between them. And then a really important other thing to know is that right here you could set the delay. So let's say you want it to really hang much longer on this frame. So we can increase that number to, for example, 8. Play that again. See how he hangs on that frame much longer. And that's the basics of it. Obviously, save your progress quite frequently. And yeah, that's really the core functionality of it. You can look at your animation mirrored. Most game engines that support Retro Animator, you're going to be able to just tell the game engine to create the flipped versions of all of your animations. So you want to just only animate all of your characters facing one direction. But you can preview it that way if you'd like. And then one last thing is Retro Animator does allow you to create collision rectangles, which is super useful. And what you would do is you would go to a frame and then you would turn on show col rect, which is collision rectangle, and you would click plus col rect. We'll call this jab 1, and then it just automatically creates it down here, and you could move it and size it to whatever you want. And that's how you have a nice collision box for your game. And then again, like a game authoring system that supports Retro Animator will have functionality to detect when these collision boxes overlap other collision boxes and other characters, or overlap sprites and things of that sort. So that is the basics of it. This should be enough information to really start getting a lot done. And feel free to leave questions in the Pixel Glass Discord channel dedicated to Retro Animator. That'll be the fastest way to get any questions you have answered and maybe inspire me to make a follow-up tutorial that gets into more advanced features.
If you enjoy our content and want to keep up to date on our games, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, if you want to support our projects, consider becoming a patron. The link's in the description, and we'll see you soon.